Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are very pleased to have with us today Professor Matt Goldish. Professor Goldish earned his BA from the University of California and holds a Ph.D. from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Professor Goldish serves as the Samuel M. and Esther Melton Chair in Jewish History at Ohio State University. And Professor Goldish is a specialist in Jewish and European history with interest in Messianism, Jewish-Christian intellectual relations, and Sephardic studies. Professor Goldish has published Judaism in the Theology of Sir Isaac Newton, the Sabbatean Prophets, Spirit Possession in Judaism, and today we will be discussing Jewish questions, Responsa on Sephardic life in the early modern period. It is a wonderful book, insightful, entertaining, with great stories, Responsa, that we'll get into today, and urge our viewers and listeners, as I did simply go on to Amazon, click a button, free delivery anywhere in the world, and it's really a wonderful book. Professor Goldish, thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Just to get started, this is kind of a broad question. Response on Sephardic life. How would you define Sephardim, and what are Sephardi Responsa?
It's trickier than it seems. I remember being at a conference a number of years ago where a large part of the conference was discussing the question of who are Sephardim and who they aren't. Technically, or in terms of kind of traditional definitions, being Sephardi meant being a Jew from the Iberian Peninsula, from somewhere in what we now define as Spain or Spain and Portugal. But as Jonathan Ray and some other people have pointed out, those Jews probably didn't use the term very often. They did use it. The Rambam uses it. Other people use it. But it was really when they left, or when they were expelled in 1492, forcibly converted in 1497 in Portugal, and then escaped the Iberian Peninsula, that's when people really start needing an appellation for these people. And so for my purposes, Sephardim are people whose origins are in the Iberian Peninsula, but they might be found after 1492 or even after 1391 in North Africa, in the Ottoman Empire, all over the place, various parts of Europe, and even in the Americas. But they trace their origins back to Spain and or Portugal. The current usage, you will hear people referring to everybody who's not an Ashkenazi as a Sephardi, and it's very problematic. In Israel, they've created this category called Edot Mizrach, which is also a problematic grouping, because somebody who comes from Afghanistan is completely different from somebody who comes from North Africa, who is completely different from a Yemenite. And many of the people who are thrown into that category, kind of resent that there's this catch-all category for everybody who's not Ashkenazi, which is a very Ashkenazi-centric way of looking at things. So I'm not going to address the problems that we have now with this category of Sephardi or Edot Mizrach. For my purposes, it's people who trace their origins back to Spain or Portugal. Even in the early modern period that I deal with, roughly 1450 to 1750, it becomes a problem because, for example, a lot of Sephardim, including, for example, the Ramban, end up in or spend time in North Africa. And in North Africa, there are already Jews who are not Sephardim. There are Berber Jews, and there are various people who have been living in those places sometimes for a very long time. And the Sephardim come and they have this very strong culture. And in many cases, their culture just washes over the local Jewish culture. And so everybody just becomes kind of Sephardified, if I could say that. Other places, there's a clash. Other places in North Africa, there are Toshavim, they're the original inhabitants, and the Sephardim, and they're at loggerheads with each other. So it is a complicated category, and I just do my best. If people speak some version of a Spanish language or dialect, and they trace themselves, or at least part of their ancestry, back to Spain or Portugal, they are Sephardim for me. And Sephardi Chachamim, Sephardi rabbis, it's a little bit easier because you look at somebody's last name, you look at the tradition out of which they come and where they were trained, and not so hard to identify who's a Sephardi, perhaps, in that case.